Lord, help us understand your word well, help us understand it correctly, and just give us sober minds as we go into it. In your name we pray, amen.
Amen.
Okay, so today's a little bit different because we already covered this chapter last week, but what we're going to do instead is we're going to go right through the chapter again, but we're going to talk about how it was fulfilled. And we're going to have more to talk about probably for the end of the chapter, mainly because we kind of talked about this last week, but the end of the chapter, when it comes to Daniel 11, is the weirdest part. Because it's hard to determine whether or not Daniel is still talking about Antiochus, like Antiochus IV, or if he's talking about somebody else. Because for the first, I think it's 36 verses or so, it is easy to determine exactly what he is specifically predicting. But when you go beyond that, some of the prophecies can be applied to Antiochus, but some of them, it's hard to perceive exactly how they would be applied to him, which would lead us to believe that it would apply to a future person. The issue is we don't know who it is. In which case, like most people, would lead towards it being some sort of Antichrist figure. Which also wouldn't be entirely surprising because pretty much every vision Daniel has had has featured some sort of Antichrist figure showing up. Like the little horn in multiple divisions and stuff. And so it wouldn't be entirely surprising, but it is kind of weird. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to walk through the most detailed prophecy in the Bible, and we are simply going to detail the fulfillment of the prophecy. If you're watching online, whenever we covered it in Daniel chapter 11, we went out of our way to not talk about how these prophecies were fulfilled. We simply analyzed them as if we were Daniel's original audience, trying to understand what was being said. Now we're actually going to look at this from people reading it centuries and millennia later, and we're just going to talk about the actual fulfillment of it. And this will actually be helpful for us because I think sometimes as Christians we're not as familiar with the history of what took place in between the Old and the New Testament. And so this is going to be almost a crash course in a few hundred years of intertestamental history. There are 140 prophecies, how I counted them, in this little chapter. 110 of them are pretty easily identifiable with history, but then it's the final 30 prophecies are the ones where it's what's going on there? And so, let's go through it. If you look on the left, that is just the text of Daniel, and on the right, I have gone through and spent countless hours just trying to fill this out and talk about exactly what was going on here. I was wanting to have more time to work on it, but I ended up being totally sick since last week's Bible study, and so towards the end of the chapter, I kind of had to throw it together a little bit more quickly over the last day or two. I was wanting to work on it throughout the week, but I was pretty much just bedridden and not wanting to look at computer screens. So anyways, I guess what we can do is whenever we get to a new slide, Sean, I'm just going to have you read through the left column, and then we'll go through and I'll just kind of detail the fulfillments.
Okay. So just go ahead.
Yeah, go for it.
Behold, 3 more kings are going to stand in Persia. Then a 4th will gain far more riches than all of them. As soon as he becomes strong, though, through his riches, he will arouse the whole empire against the kingdom of Greece. And a mighty king will stand, and he will dominate with great domination and do as he pleases. But as soon as he stands, his kingdom will be broken up and parceled out towards the 4 winds of heaven. But not to his own descendants, nor according to his domination with which he dominated. For his kingdom will be uprooted and given to others besides them.
Perfect. Thank you. Alright, so quick reminder for me. Who is it who is serving as the Persian king at the time period that Daniel is writing?
Was it Darius? Or was it
Darius is the Mede.
Darius.
Or we've debated about whether or not Darius the Mede is the same as this person or not. But who is the Persian guy?
Oh, Cyrus.
Cyrus the Great, right? Cyrus the Great, from about 539 to 530 BC, he is the one that is ruling at the time Daniel is writing. And Daniel begins by saying, behold, 3 more kings are going to stand in Persia. And if you just look at, if you just pull out your historical textbooks and you look at the Persian kingdom, this would be Cambyses II, who ruled from 530 to 522. Smerdris, who ruled in 522 by itself, just for a very short time period, and then Darius I. who ruled from 522 to 486 BC. Now, if you have seen the Spartan movies, like the 300 movies, you might have heard of Darius the First, because he is mentioned in both of them, but he is not the primary king in either one of them. He does show up in. Have y'all seen the 300 movie? Like the.
It's been a long time.
Yeah.
I've never seen the entire thing.
Okay, so the original one covered the Battle of Thermopylae, and then the second one was actually a prequel. It was a prequel / sequel to where it covered a battle going on at the same time period, but it was like the naval stuff. But it did feature Darius in it. And that's because Darius was the predecessor of Xerxes. And this would be who Daniel's referring to whenever he says, I guess this is the angel speaking to Daniel. A fourth will gain far more riches than all of them. And this would be Xerxes the First, who the book of Esther actually calls by a different name. What is his name in Esther? He is the chief king in the book of Esther.
Should know this.
Keep wanting to say Artaxerxes, but it's not.
No, it's Ahasuerus.
Ahasuerus, there we go.
Yeah.
I had that name in one, but I thought that was someone else.
Sure. No. So the book of Esther, whenever you read about Ahasuerus, think Xerxes. It's the same person, just two different names for the same guy. And so Xerxes would be the fourth king who was far richer than all the other ones, because when you look at the Persian records, that was true of him. And it says that as soon as he becomes strong through all his riches, he will arouse the whole empire against the kingdom of Greece. And sure enough, that is exactly what Xerxes did. And this is where you see the battles that eventually lead to, the events that you see in the movies, like the 300 movies and stuff like that. To where in 480 BC, he did invade Greece. And this is why the Spartans had to do what they had to do, because they're terrified, because the Persians are coming in, and they're like, oh, we need to do something to stop them. And so that's where you have King Leonidas and his 300 Spartans and a bunch of other soldiers who try to stop him at the, what is the pass?
The Thermopylae Pass.
Is it just called the Thermopylae Pass? Okay. So it was the Battle of Thermopylae, and so they're at that pass, and ultimately, the Spartans end up dying. But they do a good job at kind of like trying to halt things and stuff, but the Persians still go through, and there ends up being this huge battle. But the angel says that a mighty king will stand, and he will dominate with great domination and do as he pleases. And this is going to be a reference to Alexander the Great. And you'll notice that a big time jump has occurred here, right? Xerxes invaded Greece in 480 BC. Alexander the Great doesn't really show up till 336 BC. But this is one of the few places in the text where it actually allows for a time jump like that, right? It doesn't say that, oh, this is so-and-so's son. It just says there's going to be this Persian invasion of Greece, and eventually a mighty king will stand, right? And it doesn't exactly say when that is. It doesn't say that it's this the Persian king. It doesn't say that it's his adversary. Just eventually a mighty king will stand, and that would be Alexander the Great. But as soon as he stands, his kingdom will be broken up and parceled out toward the four winds of heaven. And this would be a reference to Alexander's death, because Alexander died at a very young age. He died at the age of 32. And that was after having conquered pretty much the entire known world at his time, which is like absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
Because how long was that he actually was serving as like the ruler there? Is that 13 years, I guess? So he started when he was like, I guess, 19 years old.
Something like that.
And so over 13 years, he just conquers like everything. And keep in mind, like his father was also a ruler who had already conquered quite a bit, but that doesn't take away from what Alexander himself accomplished. Yeah. But he died really young. And we're going to talk about this again in a second, but he died so young that he did have kids, but the kids were not old enough to legitimately rule. And so ultimately his kingdom was going to be divided. And it says that they're parceled out toward the four winds of heaven. And this is actually kind of interesting. I'm going to pull up a map in a second. But you will see that this actually does work out if you're viewing Jerusalem as the geographical center of the whole story. Right? Which I think we're supposed to in Daniel chapter 11, because remember, it's written in Hebrew. It's primarily about the Jewish people. But if you view Jerusalem as the geographical center, it actually does work to where they're literally going north, south, east, and west. Which is kind of cool. And so there's going to be four primary divisions of the land. There's going to be Antigonus, who goes to the north, Ptolemy, who goes to the south, Seleucus, who goes to the east, and then Cassander and Lysimachus who go to the west. And so it's not going to be four like strict divisions of the land right off the bat. It's going to be really divided amongst 5 people. But over time, it's going to be ironed out to where there's really 4 primary divisions and kingdoms, but there's only going to be 2 that are really relevant to Daniel's chapter here. It says, but this was not to his own descendants, nor according to his domination by which he dominated. And this is because Alexander's kingdom was not given to his heir, because his son Alexander IV, like I said, he was too young at the time, and his half-brother Philip III, I forget where he was at the time, but he ends up being killed. And his son ends up being killed as well. And so, even if they could become the heir, there was so much tension there that they were killed off very quickly. And so instead, the kingdom is going to be fragmented, and there's going to be a bunch of people constantly competing for rule. And that's actually going to lay the context for the rest of this chapter. Because there's going to be 2 kingdoms, the king of the north and king of the south, who are constantly battling against one another for supremacy. But they're all fighting over things that were part of Alexander's unified kingdom. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
For his kingdom will be uprooted and given to others besides him. And people would associate this with what is known as the Wars of the Diadochi, which is a reference to the different, like the people that we just mentioned above, as they were fighting for supremacy. And so for about 40 years or so, they are in constant conflict, fighting with one another, fighting for supremacy, and eventually things are going to iron out. So that whenever Alexander dies, this is more or less how things are broken up, right? So like I mentioned, there's Antigonus, right? And he's the founder of the Antigonid dynasty, and you will see that over there just in the central region, the orange, right? But if you look at the timeline, Antigonus doesn't end up being in charge for very long. And so things are going to shift very quickly to where he's got about 5 years of power there, and then he's going to be taken out, but all the other guys last a lot longer. Cassander is going to be the king of Macedon, and Macedon is way over there to the far west. And then Lysimachus is also going to be with him over there to the west. And so if you're looking at Jerusalem, right, you've got those people to the west, you got Antigonus to the north, you got Ptolemy to the south, and you got Seleucus to the east. And so it's kind of cool to where literally there is north, south, east, west in there. Even though the text doesn't demand that, but I just think that's kind of cool. And so that's how things start off. But by the time you get to the end of 281, things have ironed out like this, to where there are really 4 primary kingdoms, and really it's 3 kingdoms, and then there's just a bunch of like city-states and stuff. There's the Antigonid kingdom, which is the blue part. The city-states are the purple, and that's usually what you're going to see referenced as, a lot of Greek stories and stuff reference them functioning as city-states. But then there's the Seleucid kingdom, which is the green, and the Ptolemaic kingdom, which is the orange. And what do you notice about where the 2 meet?
They meet up pretty much in Israel.
Yeah, they meet up in the land of Israel, right? I guess, according to this map, the Ptolemies are the ones in charge of Israel. And sure enough, whenever we pick up in the book of Daniel, that's going to be exactly the case. Mm-hmm. To where the Ptolemies are the ones who, they dominate the land of Israel for a long time period. But there's a reason why Daniel 11 is going to focus on the kings of the north and south constantly fighting with one another. It's because they're constantly fighting back and forth, and Israel is caught in the crossfires. And so if you just look at the map, you're like, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. And so keep that in mind. And just for frame of reference, whenever Daniel referenced the king of the north, who's he going to be talking about?
The king of the Seleucids.
The Seleucids, right? And the king of the south would be? The Ptolemies, right? So just keep that in mind going forward, to where if you just look at the map, it's literally the Seleucids are the ones to the north, the Ptolemies are the ones to the south. All the other guys, they're not even going to be part of the picture anymore, right? So you can kind of forget about them. The kings of the north and south are the ones we care about because that's where Israel is at. And so, let's go back to this. You can read it, Sean.
Then the king of the south will grow strong, along with one of his princes, who will grow strong over him and obtain dominion. Indeed, his domain will be a great dominion, and after some years they will form an alliance. And the daughter of the king of the south will come to the king of the north to carry out an equitable arrangement. But she will not retain her position of power, nor will he continue to stand with his power, but she will be given up, along with those who brought her in, and the one who fathered her as well as he who strengthened her in those times.
So to try to keep things at least a little bit more entertaining, I did try to put some images in here of just different coins or statues and stuff that we have of these kings. And I'll put the kings, like, for each slide, the king that is relevant to that slide, the king of the north, those ones are on the north, and on the upper part of the screen, and the kings of the south are on the bottom part. And so it says, then the king of the south will grow strong. And so this is after Alexander's death. There is a time period of unrest where people are fighting, and then eventually there's going to be one king of the south who grows strong, and that would be Ptolemy the First. He is the one who is going to really establish his rule. He's the one I even mentioned in previous slides, to where he was one of the guys who was on the map there. And he's going to rule from 305 to 282 BC, and he's going to be in charge of Egypt, and as we saw on the map, he's going to have dominion over the land of Israel as well, right? So basically, everything from Israel southwards, that is all of his stuff. And he establishes a very stable and wealthy kingdom. And for a time period, he's going to expand even further into the north, but there's going to be a person who puts a big wrench in those plans, and that's the next guy. So it says, the king of the south will grow strong, along with one of his princes who will grow strong over him and obtain dominion. This would be Seleucus the First, who you will notice also reigned from 305 to 281 BC. Originally, if you go prior to 305, him and Ptolemy were allies. And Ptolemy originally had a much bigger possession of the land. To where I don't even remember, let me look if the map included that. No, this map didn't include that. I'm assuming this is after it, like around the time Antigonus fell. I don't know the exactly what like the historical information is there.
Yeah.
I don't know if when Antigonus fell, Ptolemy took over all of that stuff, but eventually he did end up in charge of a lot of that area, right? But Seleucus was originally one of Ptolemy's buddies, and he was a satrap of Babylon under Ptolemy before ultimately seizing the power for himself and becoming a rival king. To where, I forget the exact details because there was just so much going on that I can't remember all of it.
Yeah.
But I believe what had happened is that like Ptolemy helped Seleucus out somehow, and like Seleucus had been like fleeing away from something to where he ended up being taken to Babylon. I think he was being hidden away there, and then he became a satrap or something like that. But then he eventually rose up and became a rival king, to where all of a sudden now you have the king of the north and the king of the south. And it says, indeed, his domain will be a great dominion. And the Seleucid Empire under Seleucus I, it actually became the largest successor kingdom, surpassing even that of Ptolemy's kingdom. And so he started off as under Ptolemy, but he ends up becoming even greater. And his empire, it included all of Syria, Persia, and eastward. So if you go back to the map here, you'll see that the Seleucid Empire the kingdom it's the biggest, right? It covers all of that stuff to where it's even bigger than Ptolemy's. And so, then it says that after some years, they will form an alliance. And this is true, right? After decades of conflict, the Ptolemies and the Seleucids did attempt peace in 252 BC. And you'll notice that neither Seleucus I nor Ptolemy I are in charge anymore. And that's going to be something we have to deal with as we go through this. Daniel is not always going to let us know when there's a new king of the south or king of the north in charge, right? There are times where he will, but at times it's just gonna say king of the south, king of the north, and you just have to know it's the king of the south or north at that time.
Yeah.
Right. And so in 252 BC, the Ptolemaic and Seleucid kingdoms, they do attempt peace, and it says, and the daughter of the king of the south will come to the king of the north to carry out an equitable arrangement. And sure enough, Berenice, the daughter of Ptolemy II, was sent to marry Antiochus II. So Antiochus II was, he's the one who directly followed after, or actually no, there might have been a few people, there might have been something in between Seleucus I and Antiochus, because Antiochus II didn't start reigning until 261. But Ptolemy and Antiochus, they do try to broker a deal, and they do this by means of Ptolemy's daughter Berenice. And she goes and she marries Antiochus II in order to seal this deal. But one thing that's important for us to remember here, because it's going to be relevant in a second, is that in order to marry Berenice, Antiochus had to divorce his current wife, whose name was Laodice. And so he had to divorce her in order to make Berenice, his primary wife, in order to secure that deal. And stuff's going to happen in a second. So the text tells us but she will not retain her position of power. And sure enough, after Ptolemy II died in 246 BC, Antiochus II ditched Berenice and returned to his first wife, Laodice. And so we see that Antiochus was simply doing this to appeal, to appease Ptolemy. But as soon as Ptolemy dies, he ditches Berenice and goes back to his original wife because he no longer has that reason to stay, right? Nor will he continue to stand with his power. And if you look at the fulfillment there, Antiochus's position ultimately ended up becoming unstable, and he was poisoned. And what's so crazy about this is that if you actually look into the story, it seems like we have good reason to believe that it is his wife, Laodice, who actually ended up poisoning Antiochus. And he ended up dying in the same year that Ptolemy II died. So we don't know all the details behind that, but it is interesting that just like Daniel predicted, both the woman who married Antiochus, she lost her position of power, and in that same year, Antiochus himself did. And the irony is that it seems like the woman that he ditched Berenice for, his former wife, is the one who actually took away his power. I don't know if it was just she was vengeful because he ditched her, but according to the history books, it would suggest that Laodice is the one who killed him, which is crazy. And then it says, but she will be given up. And so this is referred, because keep in mind, Daniel has never mentioned Laodice so far, right? The history textbooks tell us about Antiochus' first wife, but Daniel has not mentioned that. So when it says, but she will be given up, it's still referring to Berenice, right? And sure enough, Berenice was also murdered by Laodice in the same year. I've seen people describe this section of the history here as just being very soap opera-ish, because it literally just sounds like an amazing movie, to where you've got these two rival kings who they try to establish a peace deal, and one king gives his daughter to the other king, and the one king has to ditch his wife, but then once the other king dies, he ditches the girl for the other wife, but then the wife who got ditched originally murders him, murders the other girl. It's like, there's just so much crazy stuff going on there. And so Berenice was also murdered. And then we read that along with those who brought her in and those who fathered her, as well as he who strengthened her in those times. And sure enough, in that same year, we have a bunch of people dying, right? Laodice, she also had all of Berenice's attendants killed in the purge. And then, as we already mentioned, her father died in the very same year, to where, keep in mind that Daniel did not tell us that it was Ptolemy's death that led Antiochus to ditch Berenice, right? Daniel did not tell us that. History told us that. And so this is the first time we're learning about Ptolemy's death in Daniel's account so far. But then also, Berenice's infant son, Antiochus III, was also killed by Laodice. And so Laodice is just really very vengeful, very murderous. And question to y'all, how do you think that the Ptolemaic kingdom is going to respond to what Laodice just did?
Not very good.
Yeah, not very good, right?
Yeah.
Even though she is a Ptolemy, right?
No, Laodice was from the north, right? Berenice was from the south.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. And so Laodice was the wife of the north, who she has now taken out the northern king, as well as the southern princess, and the person who should have been the heir to the throne, who was the southern princess's son. And in that same year, the dad died as well. And so things got shaken up right here to where in the same year, everything goes down.
Yeah.
It's safe to say that the next year is probably going to be pretty influential.
But a branch from her roots will stand in his place, and he will come against their military force, enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he will deal with them and display strength. And also their gods with their metal images and their desirable vessels of silver and gold he will bring into captivity to Egypt. And he on his part will stand from the king of the north for years. Then he will enter the kingdom of the king of the south, but will return to his own land.
All right. And so, since basically everybody in the south got murdered by Laodice, you have to be wondering, well, who the heck's going to reign now? Well, it turns out that Berenice, the daughter who was killed, she had a brother. And that's exactly what Daniel's referring to whenever he says a branch from her roots will stand in his place, right? So if Berenice is, if she's a branch, well then another branch from her roots would be another child of her father, right? And so Ptolemy II had a son who is known as Ptolemy III. You'll notice that they were not very original with their names. I can't say anything because I'm the son of a senior and I'm glad I'm naming my kid David, so I really can't say anything. But so Ptolemy III, he reigned in both of their father's place, and he ends up reigning for quite a bit amount of time, right? 246 to 222 BC. Daniel says, and he will come up against their military force and enter the fortress of the king of the north. I wonder if Ptolemy III would have a motive for launching a northern campaign. Prior to this, it seems like they had kind of established a peace deal, but Laodicea really screwed that up. And so Ptolemy III, he did launch a campaign against the Seleucids in order to avenge his sister, and this kicked off what is known as the Third Syrian War. You'll notice that it's the third one, and that's because they had already been fighting beforehand, right? But this one lasts 5 years, and largely the Ptolemies are going to be kicking butt for a bit. And he will deal with them and display strength. Ptolemy III's success did prove to be, his campaign proved to be successful. Ptolemy advanced further than anyone in the east, and Laodicea was eventually killed, which you gotta imagine that was probably his primary goal. Like, just get rid of this annoying girl who murdered everybody in my family. Daniel says, and also their gods, with their metal images and their desirable vessels of silver and gold, he will bring to captivity in Egypt. And according to the history books, we kind of talked about this when we were going through last week, but we talked about how there, like, some of the language in Daniel would suggest to us that maybe these things were originally from Egypt, and that is what history would suggest. To where, if you actually look at the accounts of Ptolemy's reign, he does go down in history as having restored cultic items that had been plundered from Egypt by the Seleucids. And for this reason, in 243 BC, which is in the middle of the Third Syrian War, he was granted the title Euergetes, which just means benefactor. And that's because he, as a result of all of his northern campaigns, he was bringing back so many things and putting them in the temples and helping kind of restore the religion that they gave him the title benefactor. And he, on his part, will stand from the king of the north for years. Sure enough, after a successful campaign, Ptolemy III returned to Egypt and he stopped attacking Syria in 241 BCE. Why do I have... Oh, I guess I just have the reigns of those two kings right there. I don't know why I put that there. I guess I was just like wanting to say how long they reigned. You'll notice that both of them start reigning in the same time period, but the king of the north is going to reign a little bit longer, right? He's going to reign, the king of the south is going to reign a little bit longer. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Right, because BCE, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so Ptolemy III is going to reign about 3 years longer than the other king. Hold up, real quick. Oh, no, that's not what I'm going to look at. The reason I might have put that might have been actually a translation thing, now that I think about it. Let me look. That is verse 8.
Are you saying because he will stand from the king of the north, that 3-year gap?
Yeah, well, I think that some translations, I thought that some translations said that he would remain he will stand longer than the king of the north or something like that. But that might be a later verse that I'm just kind of conflating it. So if you're looking at the New King James, it says, and he shall continue more years than the king of the north.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the reason I put their reigns there is because I was trying to acknowledge that there's a dual interpretation and both of them work. Mm-hmm. To where if it's simply about him refraining from attacking, that did actually happen. In 241 BCE, he refrained from attacking. But if it is referring to him standing longer and reigning longer, that is also true. Right? So I was trying to remember why I put that detail. Then he will enter the kingdom of this. Then he will enter the kingdom of the king of the south. So this would be the king of the north now, right? And sure enough, after peace was negotiated, Seleucus II did attempt to recover his losses from the war, but just like Daniel says, he will return to his own land. And Seleucus II did ultimately fail and return home without success. And so that was just kind of a failed campaign on his part. This is just a map of the battles that are going on here. I mainly put this on here just to let you know, just so you see who's caught in the crossfire of all of it. Because these are, you can see them going back and forth here, and in the middle of all of it is the land of Israel, because that's going to be relevant later on.
And his sons will stir themselves up, so they will gather a multitude of great forces. And one of them will keep on coming and overflow and pass through, that he shall return and stir himself up as far as his fortress. And the king of the south will be enraged and go forth and fight with the king of the north. Then he will cause a great multitude to stand, but that multitude will be given into his hand. Then the multitude will be carried away. His heart will be lifted up, and he will cause tens of thousands to fall, yet he will not prevail.
Sweet. So here we're going to be introduced to Antiochus III, who is not the Antiochus from that we typically think of whenever we think of the Book of Daniel. We'll get to him in a second. But Antiochus III goes down as Antiochus the Great because he was known for being like pretty great, like this. Usually it's only the certain, like Alexander the Great, Cyrus the Great. Usually they have to earn their title. Mm-hmm. It says, and his sons will stir themselves up, right? So this is the sons of, was it Antiochus II? Right? Oh no, Seleucus II. Yeah, so the sons of Seleucus II are going to stir themselves up. And that's because he's going to have two sons back to back who do sit on the throne. The first one is Seleucus III, but he's only going to sit on the throne for a few years before he ends up dying. And as far as I'm aware, I don't think he really accomplishes a whole lot other than just warfare. Antiochus III, he is going to accomplish a lot, and he's going to sit on the throne for almost like 40 years. He's going to be there for quite a bit. So it says, they will gather a multitude of great forces, and that's because both sons did gather armies in an attempt to rebuild Seleucid strength. Because keep in mind, currently, it is the Ptolemies who are in charge, right? Because ever since Laodicea betrayed people and stuff like that, the Ptolemies had this victorious campaign north, and the northern kingdom is kind of struggling a little bit to where they tried to recover their losses, but they really couldn't do it. But under these two guys, they are going to recover a lot of their power. And one of them will keep on coming and overflow and pass through, that he shall return and stir himself up as far as his fortress. And this would be a reference to Antiochus III. So after his brother Seleucus III was assassinated, Antiochus launched southern campaigns resulting in rapid expansion toward Egypt. And he is going to be the one who really starts putting the southern kingdom in their place. And the king of the south will be enraged and go forth and fight with the king of the north. This would be a reference to Ptolemy IV, who would fight back at a very famous battle known as the Battle of Raphia in 217 BC. Some people call this the Battle of the Elephants, and that's because, as we're going to see in the next part, there's going to be a lot of elephants. Daniel says he will cause a great multitude to stand, and if you actually look at the account of this battle right here, like I said, it's a famous battle just to historians who study this stuff. It was one of the largest Hellenistic battles, featuring approximately, it is possible that the records are exaggerating, we never know. But according to the records, approximately 70,000 soldiers on each side, and 200 elephants on each side, which is pretty crazy. I just find that so fascinating that they would fight on elephants, because that doesn't honestly seem that useful. It's good for stomping on people, I guess, but
living tanks.
Yeah, but harder to control and stuff. I just find that funny, and it makes me think of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, that's the first thing I thought when you mentioned that.
Oliphants or whatever they call them.
That's what they call them.
So he will cause a great multitude to stand, but the multitude will be given into his hand, right? And so we've been tracking the king of the north, and it seems like Daniel's implying that the kingdom of the north is going to have the bigger army, but ultimately, despite the fact that he's a really powerful king, he's actually going to be destroyed, and it's going to be a little bit surprising, right? Because based on everything Daniel's saying here, it looks like the king of the north is really doing a good job, but then there's almost like this unexpected victory that the king of the south experiences. And sure enough, that's exactly what the Battle of Raphia was. To where, if you actually look at history, Ptolemy IV was not a well-respected leader. He was not viewed as a good king, but he did experience this one random success at the Battle of Raphia, to where Antiochus was put in his place, despite the fact that Antiochus had the bigger army. So that's kind of cool. And so the southern kingdom ends up winning by a total landslide, and then we read, "Then the multitude will be carried away." And sure enough, the Seleucid threat was temporarily removed for a time period, and it says, "His heart will be lifted up." Well, this would be a reference to the king of the south. And we don't know if it's because of this or what, but according to history, Ptolemy IV was a very arrogant king, to where even his people did not like him, because he was known for he's your like textbook definition of just like a self-indulgent, debauched king who just sits in the throne room throwing parties.
Like a Nero, obviously.
Yeah. So like that was his reputation, and so I don't know if the textbooks like directly like correlate it to his unexpected victory, but Daniel doesn't necessarily say that either. It just says his heart will be lifted up. It doesn't say that they're directly tied together. But we do know that, right? So his heart becomes lifted up, and the sources present him as indulgent, negligent, hedonistic, just very complacent and self-satisfied, and not really a good king in any way whatsoever. Like I said, that one battle was just like I don't even know if he was there for the battle. The king gets the credit, but it's the commanders who are the ones who are doing all the heavy lifting.
True.
And he will cause tens of thousands to fall, yet he will not prevail. And so, in spite of Ptolemy IV's negligence, he did ultimately prove successful in the battlefield, kind of like with the Battle of Raphia, and even with some other campaigns, but his success would ultimately be short-lived, and eventually things are going to come to bite him in the butt.
And the king of the north will again cause a much greater multitude than the former to stand. And at the end of the times of those years, he will keep on coming with a great military force and much equipment. Now in those times, many will stand against the king of the south. The violent ones among your people will also let themselves up in order to cause the vision to stand, but they will fall down. Then the king of the north will come, cast up a siege ramp, and capture a well-fortified city. And the might of the south will not stand, not even their choicest troops, for there will be no strength to make a stand.
Thank you. So, let's talk about more cool things that Antiochus III did. And the king of the north will again cause a much greater multitude than the former to stand, right? And so this is probably referencing the Battle of Raphia, right? There was 70,000 on each side, and Antiochus still lost, so now he raises up an even bigger army. And sure enough, from 216 to 205 BCE, Antiochus spent those years rebuilding his empire, expanding eastward and multiplying his wealth. So rather than focusing southward, he kind of was just, he went back home and he focused on rebuilding. And he focused on other areas that he knew he could conquer. Daniel says, "And at the end of the times of those years, he will keep on coming with a great military force and with much equipment." Sure enough, after Ptolemy IV died in 204 BC, Antiochus III launched a second southern invasion, leading to the Fifth Syrian War from 202 to 195 BC. This is just a classic maneuver of attacking your enemy whenever they're vulnerable, right? The best time to launch an attack against another government is whenever there's a shift in power. And so, whenever one king dies, Antiochus attacks. Now, in those times, many will stand against the king of the south. The violent ones among your people will also lift themselves up in order to cause the vision to stand, but they will fall down. And so, while Antiochus III is launching his attacks southwards, Ptolemy V is going to be the one who's now in charge, but he's just going to be a baby, right? And so, he's just an infant who was literally born. When did he start reigning? He started reigning in he started reigning the year that he was born, I guess. So he's literally an infant, And so, again, you can see why Antiochus is attacking at this time, because the king isn't even somebody who can actually do anything, right?
Yeah.
Basically, there's a bunch of commanders and stuff who are ruling on his behalf. And so this is a good time to attack, but the Ptolemies aren't going to be alone, right? Philip V of Macedon, he actually joined Antiochus III in his invasion, and so he's going to be helping him fight. And there's also internal conflict that is working against Ptolemy V from like securing his power, right? And so there's a lot of things that are being stacked against the king of the south. It's not just Antiochus; it's also Philip V of Macedon, who is, I would assume, descended from like Alexander and Philip and them. And so there's just all sorts of things coming from all sides, right? The Macedonians are coming, the Seleucids are coming, and then even internally, the king's a baby, and so that's not very like there's a lot of people who just aren't going to want a baby king on the throne. And then it says that some violent ones from among your people will also lift themselves up, and sure enough, as Antiochus was campaigning southwards, there were some Jews in the Holy Land who were resentful of Ptolemaic rule, and they did side with Antiochus, right? If you go back to that map from earlier, throughout this, by and large, the Ptolemies maintained control over the land of Israel, right? To where there was land going back and forth, but by and large, they held on to that. And throughout all this time, the Jewish people are going to resent it, right? In general, people don't like having foreign rulers over them, and the Jewish people especially do not like that. And so, since they resent the Ptolemies, whenever Antiochus comes down and he's trying to take the Ptolemies out, there are some Jews who are going to hop in there and join in the battle, and they side with Antiochus. But the irony here is that it's ultimately going to bite them in the butt, because Antiochus III is going to be the one who establishes rule over, like Seleucid rule over the Jewish people, and it's going to stay in his hands. One decisive battle was at the Battle of Panium, and Paneas is at the head of the Jordan River. If you remember the story in Matthew chapter 16 where Peter makes his confession that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, and then Jesus says, "Oh, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah," and stuff like that. That took place in a city called Caesarea Philippi, which is at Paneas, and so it's at the headwaters, like it's like in the shadow of Mount Hermon. There's the city of Caesarea Philippi, and it's like this whole cultic area. And there's a temple to Pan, like it's named after Pan, like the god Pan. The city of Paneas is at the headwaters of the Jordan River, and so it's like the most northern part of Israel. And there was a really decisive battle there, and I don't know if we have any historical sources that tell us that Jews were specifically in that battle in particular, but I think Josephus does tell us that Jews did participate in some of the campaign stuff, and so it would make sense that some of them are there.
Gotcha.
It says that they will fall down, and this could be a reference to Jews dying in battle, but this also could just be pointing out that the Jews are going to fail to achieve the independence that they want. And instead of becoming independent altogether, instead of being under Ptolemaic rule, they're now going to be under the Seleucids. And as we're going to see, that's going to prove even worse for them, and they're going to like it even less. So, yeah. Then the king of the north will come, cast up a siege ramp, and capture a well-fortified city. And so after the Battle of Paneas, Antiochus III continued moving southwards, and he raided different Ptolemaic strongholds along the way, and some of these would have been in the land of Israel, but also continuing down. And he subjugates the entire area, including Judea, by 198 BC, right? And so they were helping out, but now they themselves are also subjugated, and they are now part of Seleucid rule. And the might of the south will not stand. Ptolemaic forces ultimately did prove incapable of stopping Antiochus, and he continually gained more and more ground, so that not even their choicest troops, for there will be no strength to make a stand, and in spite of all their efforts, the Ptolemies would decisively lose to Antiochus. I know that there are some people who associate this particular verse with a very specific battle. I think it was at Sidon, which Sidon is a little bit further north of like Paneas and stuff like that.
Like with the siege ramp and stuff, you mean?
Yes. Yeah, because I think there was a famous battle there where, if I remember, and again, the details might be, they're kind of foggy in my head, but unless I'm mistaken, I believe that Ptolemy V, like the baby, he might have even been in Sidon at the time, to where Or either that, or there ended up being like a bait and switch to where somehow ended up like I think Ptolemy got captured or something like that. But some people associate this with that to where they'll specifically say, "Oh, we know exactly who the choicest troops are," and stuff like that. I try to be pretty conservative with a lot of this stuff because I don't want to speak like overly specifically. To where I think that this can be applied in general, but it could be that there's specific battles that Daniel has in mind. I honestly just didn't have time to read every single historical source about these battles because that would have just taken forever. So I was just kind of like trying to generalize here.
Yeah.
And so here is some of the different stuff going on here. You'll notice that it is in a different language. I think it's in Russian. The only English version of this map I could find, you had to pay for, and I was not going to spend money on a map for this. And so,
It's actually pretty funny.
yeah, and so I don't know what that is, but I'm pretty sure that size Sidon, like the one where there's the circle in blue up there.
Oh, yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's Sidon in Russian, and that's mainly because a little bit south you have like Tyre, so I'm assuming that's that's what's going on there. And then you have Peneus, which is where you see. I'm assuming that's where the X is at. I would assume because it's the headwaters of the Jordan River, right? So if you're looking at like the Dead Sea at the very bottom, and the Jordan River goes up to the Sea of Galilee, and then it goes up a little bit further. I think that's where the X is at.
Oh, I see. Those huge swords.
Yeah, and so there's that.
But he who comes against him will do as he pleases, and no one will be able to stand in opposition to him. He will also stand for a time in the beautiful land, with destruction in his hand. And he will set his face to come, with the authority of his whole kingdom, bringing with him an equitable proposal which he will put into effect. He will also give him the daughter of women to destroy it, but she will not take a stand for him, or be on his side. Then he will turn his face to the coastlands, and capture many. But a ruler will make his reproach against him cease. Moreover, he will repay him for his reproach.
Alright. So basically Antiochus is just going to keep on dominating, and the Ptolemies can do nothing about it. So it says, he who comes against him will do as he pleases. Antiochus is going to keep on dominating the region with no effective Egyptian counteroffensive. Like, the Egyptians are going to try to fight back, but there's a reason why Antiochus III is known as Antiochus the Great. He just keeps on, and it really is impressive because he had suffered such a crippling defeat early on. Yeah. But then he just he goes back, he regathers, and he comes back with a vengeance. It's like, oh, okay. So no one will be able to stand in opposition to him. And like I said, Egypt proved powerless. Rome even tried to discourage Antiochus at one point, but eventually they just ended up abandoning Egypt. Because Rome and Egypt, they had a ongoing... Rome and Egypt in general maintain a cordial relationship. There's a reason why there's going to eventually be Mark Antony and Cleopatra whole thing. So Rome and Egypt in general, they have a pretty good relationship. But in this moment, they're like, "Hey, Antiochus, you better stop attacking the Ptolemies." And Antiochus is like, "No." And Rome's like, "Oh, we tried." And then they just leave. It says he will also stand for a time in the beautiful land. And like I said, after the Battle of Peneus, in the years that followed that, Antiochus did eventually secure a hold of the land of Israel and the land of Judea and everything. And so by 198 BC, it's firmly established. Now it's under Seleucid control, not Ptolemaic, and it's going to stay under the Seleucids. And this is going to pave the way for eventually what we're going to get to with the Maccabees. With destruction in his hand. And this ties into the fact that, like I pointed out earlier, the Jewish people are going to come to eventually regret their initial support of the Seleucid dynasty. And they're not going to like it. And it's going to become a really big thorn in their side, to where eventually they're going to hate it so much that they decide to fight back. And he will set his face to the kingdom with the authority of the whole kingdom. After securing the Levant, Antiochus III sets his eyes on stabilizing control over Egypt itself, right? So he's just conquering his way southward. He wants more control. And he's going to bring with him an equitable proposal, which he will put into effect. Just because of how powerful Antiochus III is proving himself to be, and how much is going down in the south, because keep in mind, even by 195 BC, Ptolemy V is still only 9 years old, right? Like he's still really young.
Yeah.
And so there's all these internal struggles to where the people in the south, they're trying to figure out what's going on. Antiochus is getting more and more powerful. So eventually, in 195 BC, they do agree to a peace treaty. And he will also give to him the daughter of women. So as part of this peace treaty deal, Ptolemy V ends up marrying Cleopatra I, who is Antiochus's daughter. And that's in 193 BC. So Ptolemy V is like, what, 11, 12 years old at this point? But he's being married off to one of Antiochus's daughters, and so this is a reversal of what we saw earlier. Right? Earlier, it was a daughter of the Ptolemies being given to a son of the Seleucids, but now it's a daughter of the Seleucids being given to a son of the Ptolemies. And what do you think Antiochus's goal is here?
To secure power.
He's securing power, right? I mean, Ptolemy is still a kid. Right, and so he's saying he's going to send his daughter over there, marry her off to this kid, and his goal is that eventually his daughter can, win over the heart of this impressionable child, and he can secure his power.
How old is Cleopatra by this point?
I don't know, and this is not the famous Cleopatra.
Oh.
This is
like almost 200 years before that.
Yeah.
150 years before.
Yeah. Cleopatra the First is It seemed like, I don't think we know exactly when she was born. People just assume it's around the same time period as Ptolemy, but we don't know. I don't think there's usually for women there's not usually a record of off their birthdays. I mean, to be fair, there's usually not a record of most people's birthdays. Yeah. It's usually just the kings who are record.
Only the cool people get to have their birthdays recorded.
And so, as part of the deal, Ptolemy V marries Cleopatra I in 193 BC, but Antiochus' goal, like Daniel specifies, is ultimately to destroy the southern kingdom, right? And according to the records, Antiochus did seek to destabilize from within. We know that this is what his goal was. But here's the irony: neither of the it's so funny that neither of these marriage deals work out, but it's for the weirdest reasons. Right, it's not for I don't know, it's not the reasons you would expect. In the first one, it's because one guy decided to just go back to his old wife, but then his old wife killed him. It's just very unexpected. Whereas this one, it's actually because Cleopatra ends up supporting her husband, to where Antiochus sent his daughter over to try to win over Ptolemy and be influential on him. But the reverse ended up happening, and Cleopatra ends up just supporting Ptolemy. And so that whole plan ends up falling through. And so, it says that he will turn his face to the coastlands. And so, sure enough, whenever you see Antiochus realizing that he's not going to end up gaining control over Egypt, he decides to turn his attention instead to Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey. And so, in 196 BC, which is actually a few years before this event before the peace treaty and stuff like that goes into play, he does turn his attention. He starts going on some northern campaigns, and this leads to the Roman Seleucid War, which is going to last from 192 to 188 BC. And in this war, Antiochus is accompanied by the famous war general Hannibal, not to be confused with Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah.
Who was Hannibal. But Hannibal is a pretty famous person, and so I just wanted to mention that. Daniel does not mention Hannibal, but I was like, hey,
fun fact.
Yeah, fun fact in there. Kind of like with the elephants. I tried to, try to spice things up with fun historical facts, so you can mention them at parties. But a ruler will make his reproach against him cease, and moreover, he will repay him for his reproach. And so, by and large, Antiochus is true to his name, and he is very great during this battle, until things come to a head in 189 BC, when the Roman general Lucius Cornelius Scipio Asiaticus defeated Antiochus at the Battle of Magnesia. And at that battle, everything is flipped on its head, and all of Antiochus' fortunes are absolutely and utterly reversed. And so when Daniel says he will repay him for his reproach, that is more than true. So after the Treaty of Apamea, which is in the following year, 188 BC, Antiochus' prior expansion reversed, and his provinces were given away to other people. In addition to that, Antiochus is forced to pay all sorts of money to the people that he once conquered, and also to pay to Rome and stuff like that, because of all the, I guess, war crimes that he committed, and he's trying to pay like penance basically.
Yeah.
And this is going to make Antiochus very, very desperate. Not only is he paying money here, but also just to set up what's going to happen afterwards. He has a child named Antiochus IV, and that kid is taken captive at this time, right? And he ends up being a captive in Rome. And Antiochus is sent back home crying because of all he's done. And so just keep in mind, Antiochus IV, he's off in Rome right now. He's not going back with Dad. And so just keep that in mind. All right. This is just a map of the Roman-Seleucid War. This also is in a different language, but in my kindness, I did change the table down at the bottom, and I put that in English so that you could at least read that. And so, yeah. There's that. All right.
So he will turn his face towards the fortresses of his own land, but he will stumble and fall, and be found no more. Then in his place one will stand, who will have an exactor pass through the jewel of his kingdom. Yet within a few days he will be broken, though not in anger nor in battle. And in his place a despised person will stand, to whom the splendor of the kingdom has not been given, but he will come in a time of ease, and take hold of the kingdom by intrigue.
All right. So this is where I think the story just gets even, history is just cool to me. Whenever you look at history, there is so much drama that, people just don't know about. It's crazy the stuff that goes down. So where we left off last, what did I say was going on with Antiochus?
He was desperate, because he just had to pay a bunch of money and tribute and stuff, and his son got basically taken hostage.
Yes, yeah. So one of his sons is a hostage in Rome. He's going back home with his tail between his legs, and he's got a lot of money to pay off. Where's he going to get this money? Well, he's going to have to raid his own people. So, Daniel says he will return his face toward the fortress of his own land, and sure enough, as Antiochus goes back home, he's retreating to the Seleucid heartland in order to stabilize his kingdom, and so he's returning to Syria and Mesopotamia. That's where the heart of his kingdom's at. But along the way, he's also pillaging in order to presumably get money to pay off the Romans. Daniel says, but he will stumble and fall and be found no more. And that's because Antiochus was killed while pillaging a temple of Bel while in Persia in 187 BC. So he loses that battle in 189 BC. He signs the treaty in 188. He's on his way home, and he's pillaging temples, and he gets caught, and people kill him.
Nice.
And so that's how he dies, and he's found no more. But now there's a power vacuum, right? A king was just killed. Who's going to stand in his place? Well, fortunately, he had a son named Seleucus IV. And so, yeah. And keep in mind, I think that we're the ones who call them Seleucus IV, right? Back then, it was probably just Seleucus, right? There's just endless Seleucuses going, we're recording this. Don't smell her butt. Up here. Okay. Here, let me hold her so that she's because if not, she'll want to play with you.
These dogs don't know good Christian etiquette.
Yeah. Nope. Sit. Yeah. So then, in his place, one will stand, and this is Seleucus IV, who will have an exactor pass through the jewel of his kingdom. This is again where the story is just so dramatic. This part's not going to sound dramatic, but I guess it actually is going to sound dramatic, but it's going to get crazier. And so, according to the history books, we do know that Seleucus IV, this is Antiochus' son, he did send a chancellor named Heliodorus to Jerusalem to tax the temple. Whenever you actually look at Seleucus IV, since his dad, his dad was very great, did a lot of amazing things, but by the end of his dad's kingdom, the power had been severely diminished, and they were in a lot of need. Yeah. And so Seleucus IV doesn't really do a lot of conquering. He primarily focuses on taxing, right? His whole thing is trying to raise money for the kingdom to help strengthen it. And so he does send Heliodorus down to Jerusalem to tax the temple. And Daniel doesn't mention this. He just mentions an exactor passing through the land, and that would be Heliodorus. He does not mention an event that is recorded in 2 Maccabees, which actually says that when Heliodorus went there, he attempted to raid the temple, only to be turned away by angels, which is interesting. And so, according to Maccabees, Heliodorus' journey to Jerusalem was not actually successful. He went down there to tax them, but didn't actually come back with anything. Stop licking me. You need to chill, okay? Just lay there. Within a few days he will be broken, though not in anger nor in battle. This is where it gets funny to me. So, Seleucus IV's reign was pretty uneventful and short. Like I said, what? Another notification? Of course. His reign was ultimately uneventful and short. 12 years doesn't sound that short to us, but whenever you consider the fact that his dad reigned for like 36 years, that is relatively short in comparison. But what is more significant is the fact that whenever his reign was cut off, it was not cut off because of old age. It was not cut off because of sickness. It was not cut off because he died in battle. It was cut off because he was killed. And who killed him but Heliodorus, the very same tax collector that he happened to send to Jerusalem. And it seems like those are two totally unrelated events. He did not, it's not like Heliodorus came back and then, killed him out of frustration. It's just weird to me that the very person who happened to kill Seleucus IV is the person that Daniel mentions, oh yeah, by the way, he's going to send an exactor to Jerusalem. Because Daniel doesn't mention that. Daniel does not say the exactor is going to kill him. Daniel just says, oh yeah, he sends an exactor down there. But sure enough, the same exact person who went down to Jerusalem later on is the one who kills him. In general, whenever you kill a king, why do you do that?
To take that power.
Yeah, you want to take the power. But Heliodorus is not going to maintain power. And that is because there is a wise guy in the background who is already scheming. He has already got some plans. And in his place, a despised person will stand. And this is Heliodorus' brother, Antiochus IV, otherwise known as Antiochus Epiphanes. This guy's only going to be in charge for 11 years, but we are going to spend the most of the rest of this chapter talking about him. Because whenever you talk about Antiochus Epiphanes as a Jewish person, you think the embodiment of evil.
Yeah.
And so, he's going to be the one who stands in Seleucus' place. And it says...
This is not the same guy that was taken to Rome?
This is the same guy who's taken to Rome. Yeah, that's what we're going to talk about. It's actually... it's pretty cool. Okay. So, in his place, a despised person will stand, to whom the splendor of the kingdom has not been given. And so, Antiochus IV was not the heir to the throne, right? Because if your brother is the king, you're not the heir. Especially if your brother already has a son. But this is what Antiochus did, right? Like we said, last time we saw Antiochus, he was a prisoner in Rome. But it seems like, and again, I have to go probably brush up on it more to make sure this is correct, but how I've heard people talk about it is that he negotiated his release from being a hostage in exchange for none other than his brother's son. Because his brother's son is the rightful heir to the kingdom. Antiochus is not. So Antiochus says, hey Romans, you should let me go out and y'all take the actual heir, and now that I've spent so much time over here learning y'all's way of doing things, I can go get power. And so there's a trade-off, so that even though Antiochus is not the heir to the throne, he now comes back and there is a power vacuum. Because the heir to the throne has now been shipped off to Rome where Antiochus was just at. And so what Antiochus does is he takes advantage of the situation and he usurps the throne for himself. So it says, he will come in a time of ease and take hold of the kingdom by intrigue. And sure enough, this is exactly what Antiochus did. He seized power not through conflict, but through diplomacy, deception, and political maneuvering. He did not go on a wild killing spree and just wipe out everybody. Yeah. Instead, he just played it smart. He's like, hey, you let me out, I will give you my brother's son, and I can do things in a very Roman way. Him and Rome are not like buddy-buddy or anything like that, but in their minds, it seems like this was the lesser of two evils, and so that's exactly what ends up happening here. It's just he's a smart guy. You got to respect the game. Just don't respect him.
Yeah. And the arms of a flood will be flooded away before him and be broken, and also the prince of the covenants. And after an alliance is made with him, he will practice deception, and he will go up and gain power with a small force of people. In a time of ease, he will enter the richest parts of the province, and he will do what his fathers never did, nor his fathers' fathers. He will scatter, plunder, spoil, and possessions among them, and he will devise his schemes against strongholds, but only for a time.
Yeah, so, like I mentioned, there was a power vacuum at the time when Antiochus shows up, but it takes him less than 2 months to solidify power. Which I think that's a pretty good description whenever Daniel says, and the arms of a flood will be flooded away before him and broken. He is literally like, he just burst through like water breaking through a dam. He just shows up and he says, I'm the captain now. And despite the fact that there is no legitimate heir to the throne, he establishes himself very quickly in 175 BC. It also says, and the prince of the covenant. And if you go down to Jerusalem, in the very first year of Antiochus' reign, he did something unprecedented, which is actually going to affect the Bible all the way into the New Testament. He basically changes how the priesthood works, to where at the time period, whenever Antiochus took the throne, the high priest was Onias III, and he, by and large, seemed to have been a pretty good and decent priest of Israel. But he ends up being the last legitimate high priest of Israel, because what Antiochus does is he deposes Onias, and he puts a guy named Jason in his place. And what he does going forward is he establishes a precedent to where the high priesthood is no longer about a person selected by God or a person appointed by legitimate priests who know what they're doing. Instead, the priesthood simply becomes a political position, and it's for whoever can purchase the job, right? And so it's all about who's willing to work with Antiochus, who is willing to pay the money, who is willing to purchase their way into power. And this is going to affect things all the way into the New Testament, because whenever you get to the Sadducees, that is the priestly class in the New Testament, and they are associated with like the aristocracy, right? They are the rich people, and that's because at that time period the priesthood was just corrupt. It wasn't about being genuinely devoted to God. It was just wealthy people purchasing a status. Honestly, it was no different than like the Roman Senate. Actually, the Roman Senate was probably better because there were actually people who like knew what they were doing in the Roman Senate, whereas in the priesthood it was just a power play. And so Antiochus deposed Onias and put his brother Jason in place in 175, but then even Jason was eventually taken off, and he was, I don't know if it was Onias or Jason who was murdered, but Jason is replaced by Menelaus in 171. And so those are both going to be during the time of Antiochus, and that's going to affect things going forward.
They knew that it sounded so wrong to have a high priest named Jason.
Why is that?
No, just like it sounds funny. It's like,
yeah,
the high priest Jason.
I actually think that his original name was like Joshua or Jesus, like Jesus or something like that.
Oh.
But they just Greekified, like they just gave him a Greek name instead.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, but it is funny just because it's like I'm Jason, I'm the priest. And after an alliance is made with him, he will practice deception, and he will go up to gain power with a small force of people. And so Antiochus will achieve power through a bunch of treaties, right? Like we said, he's very deceptive and very cunning. And his primary tool is not force, but treachery. And like we mentioned, he had been a Roman hostage, then living in Athens whenever Seleucus IV was murdered. And he arrived with limited supporters, but rose quickly, right? So he will go up and gain power with a small force of people. So it's not going to take him very long. And so I guess at the time when Seleucus was murdered, he had not still been a hostage in Rome. So he'd already been freed, but I guess he was still exiled or something like that. To where, like I said, I'd have to just go look into the specific details there. But in a time of ease, he will enter the richest parts of the province, and he will do whatever his father or what his fathers never did, nor his father's fathers. So taking advantage of rich areas now under Seleucid control. This would be places specifically like Judea, the Egyptian Delta, like the Nile Delta and stuff like that. The richest part of the territory. Antiochus prioritized his cunning over force and really started exploiting these areas. Other Seleucid rulers had primarily relied on warfare in most of their strategies, and nobody sought to transform these regions as much as Antiochus did. Right? They all did rule with force, don't get me wrong, but Antiochus, he doesn't show any consideration for, like, he's basically asking people, like, he's good at, like, being very deceptive and working his way into power, but he's not very good at doing things that are going to keep people from revolting, right? We kind of talked about this, like, the difference between, like, the Babylonians and the Persians. The Babylonians were like, we're going to kick you out of your land, displace you, and make you do all of our things. That's like the number one way to guarantee that somebody hates you. Yeah. Whereas the Persians are like, we're going to send you back to your land, and we're going to fund rebuilding projects, and we're going to let you practice your religion. That's a guaranteed way to make sure that people are actually just like relatively chill. Mm-hmm. Antiochus, he's very smart when it comes to getting power, but he's very ruthless when it comes to just totally transforming cultures to however he wants and just being kind of reckless there. So it's kind of a contradiction in his reign. He will scatter, plunder, spoil, and possessions among them. And so he's redistributing wealth as a chief political strategy. This is one thing that he does a lot in order to, again, gain the approval of, I guess, the elite, primarily, right? He doesn't really care how much he treats a lot of the lower people, even though I do think that there are reports of Antiochus, like, sometimes, like, he was, like, a weird guy. He would just, like, dress up in a disguise and, like, walk into the city and just, like, scatter money. Like, just, like, doing weird, like, strange things. And that could be, like, kind of, like, folk tradition stuff, I don't know. Yeah. But he would reward support, secure loyalty, stabilize rule, and stuff like that. I even put it there. He scattered money to commoners amongst the street, like, in the streets. And he gave unexpected gifts to strangers. And he was just, like, distributing stuff. And this was his way of, like, gaining approval. In general, this is how a lot of politicians will do this. It's crazy how easily humans are manipulated. Because if somebody tells us that they will give us money, all of a sudden we love them. Right? I mean, even nowadays, modern politics. Like, usually the people will support whichever politician says that they will give them more money. That's just how it works. And so Antiochus knew how to do that, right? He's like, hey, if you support me, I'll give you a position of power. I will give you money. I will give you land. He disguises himself and goes scatters money to the people just because, I don't know. How exciting would it be to know that, like, you can just, like, go get up one day and walk through the streets and the king himself might be disguised amongst you scattering money. Like, it is smart. And he will devise his schemes against strongholds, but only for a time. And so, though opponents did plot against him, he outmaneuvers them through cunning military campaigns, and his campaigns are effective, but they're not stable for long. And so there are some people who, they try to plot things against him, but whenever they do that, he actually outsmarts them, because he does seem like he was a pretty cunning person. This is just a map of the 6 Syrian wars, because we're about to go into another one of those wars. And so this is a really just zoomed out picture of it. Again, me just trying to keep things entertaining.
And he will stir up his strength and heart against the king of the south with a great military force. So the king of the south will wage war with an extremely large and mighty military force for war, but he will not stand. For schemes will be devised against him, and those who eat his choice food will break him, and his military force will overflow, but many will fall down slain. And as for both kings, their hearts will be intent on evil, and they will speak falsehood at the same table, but it will not succeed. For the end is still to come at the appointed time.
Yeah. And so this is where we do get into Antiochus's military campaigns, because he did end up, like, that wasn't his, like, primary, like, his main thing, but he did eventually get into it, because every king eventually does. And this leads to the 6th Syrian War, which is from 170 to 168 BC. And this is going to be a pretty instrumental time here because it's going to lay the groundwork for what he's eventually going to do in Judea. So it says he will stir up his strength and his heart against the king of the south with a great military force. But it doesn't seem like he's the one who started it. It seems like the Ptolemies are the ones who they probably because Antiochus wasn't really a conquering guy, like a military guy that much. It seems like the Ptolemies are like, okay, we're going to attack them. But Antiochus learns about this and he preemptively attacks, right? And so it seems like he picked up on this and then he attacks them first, and he severely defeats the Ptolemies at Sinai, which is a little too close to home if you're in charge of Egypt, right? Because you're in Ptolemaic territory. Like that's not good. So the king of the south will wage war with an extremely large and mighty military force for war, and so Ptolemaic forces they attempt to resist Antiochus, and this produces substantial forces that would prove unstable due to internal weakness. So at this time period, the biggest thing standing against the Ptolemies is that they just can't get their act together. To where there's just so much debate over who's in charge. You'll even notice that Ptolemy VI, that's who we're dealing with right now, there's going to be a year in there where he's just not even on the throne. He's just like he's kind of kicked off and he's going to come back. Somebody else is going to be in his place for that year. And even in the midst of all this, there's a point where his brother is going to be on the throne in his place, but he's also going to be there. They're almost going to be like co-ruling, but they're also opposed to one another. So there's just a lot of internal issues in the south right now, which is going to really make it hard for them to beat Antiochus. So probably not the best time for them to wage war against him. And so Egypt's resistance is ultimately going to fail drastically against Antiochus. And due to the war, the Egyptians are going to suffer even more internal unrest because they're like, oh crap, this war is going not how we thought it was going to go. And so they turn against one another as people typically do. And so political intrigue, betrayal, shifts in power, all that stuff begins to occur. And all of a sudden, the South is looking very, very, like they're just falling apart. And this is going to pave the way for Antiochus to just succeed tremendously. Verse 26, and those who eat his choice food will break him, and his military force will overflow, but many will fall down slain. And so this is all referring to the king of the south now. Internal court politics will undermine Ptolemy's power. There's different regents, like Eulaeus and Linnaeus. They're the ones who are primarily conspiring here. And then later on, once they're out of the way, there's going to be these guys named Commonus and Cineas who also are conspiring. And there's just going to be so many issues right here where Ptolemy is just not doing what everybody wants him to do. Nobody else is doing what Ptolemy wants him to do. And there's going to be at each other's necks. As a result, Antiochus is just going to sweep through the Ptolemaic kingdom, and the Ptolemaic forces are going to suffer significantly. And they're just going to be blaming each other. That's the problem. And as for both kings, their hearts will be intent on evil, and they will speak falsehood at the same table, but will not succeed, for the end is still to come at the appointed time. And so there is going to be a point where Antiochus and Ptolemy, they are going to try to achieve peace. And that's because if you're kind of just tracking the family line here, Ptolemy is Antiochus' nephew. Because if you remember, just in the previous generation, you did have the daughter of Seleucid being given over to the Ptolemies. And so there is a relationship here, and they do sit down and they do try to have a conversation, but neither of them is really committed to trying to be at peace with one another. Right? They both have hidden agendas here. And so, for a time, Antiochus actually did serve as the protector or guardian of Ptolemy VI. And his goal was, of course, not to actually support Ptolemy, but to make Egypt into a client state. And the rest of the people in the southern kingdom picked up on this, right? Because they realize, they can see what Antiochus is doing. And so, for this reason, they decided to say, you know what? I know that Ptolemy VI is technically our king, but we're going to put his brother Ptolemy VIII on the throne instead. And so this is in 170 or 169 BC. The dating is debatable because we don't know exactly what month it was. But they literally put another king on the throne at the same time period as Ptolemy, and it's his brother. And this just kind of lets you know this kingdom is not doing super hot right now. right? There are literally two rival kings, and they're brothers with one another. Not a good sign for a kingdom. For the end is still to come at the appointed time. Short term, this is just telling us that this would not be the end of the Seleucid or Ptolemaic struggles. That's going to go on for a while. Long term, we see that God has appointed a historical climax, but this is not it, right?
Then he will return to his land with great possessions, but his heart will be set against the holy covenant, and he will take action, and then return to his own land. At the appointed time he will return and come into the south, but this last time it will not happen the way it did before. Indeed, ships of Kittim will come against him. Therefore he will be disheartened, and will return, and become indignant at the holy covenant, and take action. So he will come back and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant.
All right. So this is where, for right now, the first half of this, things are going great for Antiochus, and then things are going to take a very sudden turn, and this is going to make things very bad for the Jewish people. So it says, he will return to his land with great possessions, but his heart will be set against the holy covenant. He will take action, and he will return to his own land. And so this is primarily after Antiochus' first campaign, right? His first campaign against the south was very, very, very successful, right? He basically conquers everything. He ends up having Ptolemy VI as his under his custodianship. Things went really well, and so he decides that he is going to head back home because he's captured everything except for Alexandria, right? Which Alexandria is it's an important city, but he's he can deal with that. And so he's got substantial wealth. He's going back home. And as he passes through the land of Judea, because he has to go through Judea to get back home, this is where he begins to start employing his reforms. Right? We already mentioned how in 175 BC, he deposed one high priest. But now as he's returning back, he also begins to enforce Hellenization procedures and stuff like that. And somebody remind me, what is Hellenization?
Greekifying, basically.
Yeah, it's just Greekifying. You're just turning everything Greek. And so he's the one who really gets this going in Judea, which could explain why by the time you get to the New Testament, everything's in Greek. And it also seems at this time period, this is whenever he begins to auction the high priest the highest bidder, right? To where at this time period, 171 BC, even the person that he put in charge, he now deposes and puts another guy, Menelaus, in charge, right? And he's going to take action by suppressing a disturbance in Jerusalem and looting temple wealth. So this is where the people are beginning to realize, hey, we don't really like this Antiochus guy. He kind of sucks.
Yeah.
Turns out maybe we should have supported the Seleucids. And then he eventually does go back to Phoenicia, and this is in the autumn of 169 BC. However, at the appointed time, he will return and come into the south. The reason why he does this is because, like I mentioned, there were two kings sitting on the throne for the Ptolemies for a while, and so it seems like Antiochus realized he didn't have anything to worry about because they were already destroying themselves. However, they end up reconciling, and the one brother ends up stepping down. Ptolemy VI is now the only king again, and this is where Antiochus realizes, oh crud, you know what? I should probably attack them again because it seems like they're consolidating power. And so he launches a second campaign, but this last time it will not happen the way it did before. And so the first time he attacked Egypt, it was super successful. He captured everything except for Alexandria. This time, not so much. He is going to draw near to Alexandria, but there is going to be an event that takes place with a circle being drawn in the sand, and he is like literally a circle drawn in the sand. And he is going to be forced to withdraw. And we're going to read that story in a second. I'm going to save it for then. Indeed, ships of Kittim will come against him. So Kittim is Cyprus, right? And Cyprus was it was like a staging ground for Roman forces. And sure enough, a Roman squadron led by Gaius Popilius Laenas, he came down here, and we don't there's nothing in history that tells us he was staged in Cyprus. But since it was a staging ground for Roman soldiers, it's reasonable to believe that if he was coming from Rome or something like that, that he would have stationed at Cyprus for a little bit. So he would have come literally from Kittim. But what's even more ironic is that as Antiochus was going southward for this campaign, at the same time, he actually did have forces that were seizing Cyprus, which I just think that's like a funny coincidence to where Daniel does not mention Antiochus attacking Cyprus, but at the same time that Antiochus is attacking Cyprus, he does mention that ships from Cyprus will be sent against Antiochus. That's just it's a weird coincidence. And so, therefore, because this Roman squadron, opposes him, Antiochus ends up getting very disheartened, and he ultimately withdraws. He submits to Rome's demands, and he leaves, and he begins making his way back home. And last time he made his way back home, what did he begin to do?
Hellenize.
He began to Hellenize. He began to do things in Judea, and that's when he was happy. Now he's not happy. As we're going to see, we're going to read the story of what happened to him. He is humiliated. He is embarrassed. He feels emasculated. He needs to prove himself. And so this time, he is going to be much harsher on the people of Judea. So it says he became indignant at the Holy Covenant. So angry and humiliated, he took his anger out on the Jewish people, giving birth to a great persecution. It says he takes action. And sure enough, not only is he Hellenizing, but he's also going to be actively suppressing Jewish practice. And he's going to outlaw stuff, and we're going to read about that again as well. So he will come back and show regard for those who forsake the Holy Covenant. And so we already talked about how in the past Antiochus rewarded those who supported him, but in Judea, he is going to reward those not only who cooperate with Seleucid policy, and not only those who promote Hellenization, but also those who abandon the faith altogether, and who abandon Torah. And those are the ones who are going to be rewarded, and there's actually going to be a death penalty imposed on people who actively follow the Torah. And so this is the moment where you really begin to see the priesthood corrupted, right? Because now it is literally impossible to be if Antiochus is in charge and he's the one who puts the priest in his spot, and he has outlawed Judaism, the only person who can be the priest is somebody who is willing to entirely compromise. And so the priesthood becomes just totally a mess at this point. All right, Sean, could you read that for us? This is not from Daniel. This is from a Roman historian named Livy. It's from his account detailing what exactly went down with Antiochus.
After receiving the submission of the inhabitants of Memphis and of the rest of the Egyptian people, some submitting voluntarily, others under threats, Antiochus marched by easy stages towards Alexandria. After crossing the river at Eleusis, about 4 miles from Alexandria, he was met by the Roman commissioners, to whom he gave a friendly greeting and held out his hand to Popilius. Popilius, however, placed in his hand the tablets on which was written the decree of the Senate, and told him first of all to read it. After reading it through, he said he would call his friends into council and consider what he ought to do. Popilius, stern and imperious as ever, drew a circle round the king with a stick he was carrying and said, "Before you step out of that circle, give me a reply to lay before the Senate." For a few moments he hesitated, astounded at such a peremptory order, and at last replied, "I will do what the Senate thinks right." Not till then did Popilius extend his hand to the king as to a friend and ally. Antiochus evacuated Egypt as the appointed date, and the commissioners exerted their authority to establish a lasting concord between the brothers, as they had yet hardly made peace with each other.
Yeah. And so there is another account by Polybius who records the exact same thing. It's actually a more condensed version of it. Mm-hmm. But so this is a interesting story here. Whenever we think of us Texans have a very similar story. The whole line in the sand thing. But this is the original version of that, and it's a lot more adversarial. To where basically what happens is that you have Antiochus coming down for his southern campaign. He is marching towards Alexandria, and he's cut off by these Romans. And this guy, he basically says, he's reading from a tablet, not like an iPad, but like a stone, or probably not even a stone, it's probably like a wax thing, yeah. He's like, this is what the Romans have said you must do. Like, this is the orders. You have to withdraw. And he says, what are you going to do about it? And Antiochus says, let me go talk to my friends, right? Let me go see if we can negotiate something, right? So he's playing things politically smart here. And then the general, with all the audacity, he grabs a stick. he draws a circle around Antiochus and says, "You're going to give me an answer before you step out of this circle." So like he's intentionally publicly humiliating him, and he's saying, "This is not a matter of negotiation. We are in charge here. Answer me now." And Antiochus realizes what's happening. He knows he can't fight back against Rome. He says, "We will comply with what the Senate demands." And so he withdraws. And so this guy, he's embarrassed, right? Antiochus is like, oh. It's like this is like, not only did he have to withdraw, but he was publicly embarrassed in front of his entire army and everything, to where it's like, oh, this is not a good look.
Yeah.
To where a circle drawn around him and stuff. It's like, and so this is going to be why he is so angry, because, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of like think of your class as like just like schoolyard bully, right? Like, if he gets in trouble in class, he's going to take it out on his the people in the playground, right? Because his teacher exercised authority over him. He doesn't like that, so he's going to go exercise authority over the only people he can, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's what Antiochus is going to do. Rome has exerted their authority and made him feel super small. So now he's going back home. He's kicking dirt, trying to move cover up the circle, and he's going to pass through Judea. And he's going to see these people who obviously resent him, and these people who hate Hellenization, but they're the perfect people that he can assert his authority over to show them how powerful he really is. So that's what he's going to do.
Mighty forces from him will stand, profane the sanctuary fortress, and abolish the regular sacrifice. And they will set up the abomination of desolation, and by smooth words he will turn to godlessness those who act wickedly toward the covenant. But the people who know their God will display strength and take action, and those who have insight among the people will give understanding to the many. Yet they will fall by sword and by flame, by captivity and by plunder for many days.
All right, so this is where we actually get into the events that is really relevant to the Jewish people. Antiochus, he's thrown a hissy fit. He's upset. He goes through Judea, and he takes it out on them. Mighty forces from him will stand. Because of internal factions that are in Jerusalem, Antiochus is going to install political and military agents in the area. Right? He goes through the land. He realizes that things are falling apart. He is not in a mood for his kingdom to fall apart. He looks, he says, okay, if y'all priests can't figure this out, I'm deposing one, putting another in place. Right? Jason, Jason is the first high priest that Antiochus had put in place. He had deposed him back in 171, but then a few years later, he tried to take it back. Antiochus says, you're exiled. Right? He kicks him out. And so he begins to just rule with an iron reign over the people of Judea. He profanes the sanctuary fortress, right? Seleucid forces entered into Jerusalem, and they violated the temple precincts in 167 BC. And there's going to be a basically 3.5 year period where he is dominating the region and just severely oppressing them, which is what we saw in previous prophecies, right? Where we're talking about the whole 2300 evenings and mornings and stuff like that. He abolished the regular sacrifice. Sure enough, in 167 BC, Antiochus outlawed what is known as the Tamid, which is just the daily burnt offerings that were offered in the temple. And he outright just ruled, he said they could no longer be offered, and for 3.5 years they weren't offered. We don't realize how big of a deal that is because, from our perspective, the daily offerings have been cut off for 2,000 years, right? Because obviously they ended again in 70 CE when the Romans destroyed things.
Yeah.
But keep in mind, this is just read through Leviticus and tell me that you don't realize that offerings are important to the Jewish people. Even to this day, it's actually very interesting where, Jewish people, they want the temple to be rebuilt. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if y'all have ever looked into the whole red heifer thing. But in the Torah, there's this thing where a red heifer is part of the whole temple process. And for the last several decades, Jewish people have been trying to biologically and genetically engineer the existence of a new red heifer.
Oh, yeah.
So that, because there's no more red heifers as there once were in the biblical times. And so they've been trying to genetically produce, through crossbreeding and stuff, a red heifer so that if there ever is a third temple, they can get right back to the temple sacrifices. And so it really is a central thing that we kind of overlook, but he cuts them off. And they will set up the abomination of desolation. In December of 167 BC, Antiochus installs an altar to Zeus in the temple, and he sacrifices a pig on it. Right? That is the abomination of desolation. Exactly 3 years later is whenever the Maccabees are going to rededicate the temple in December of 164 BC, and that's going to give birth to the Feast of Hanukkah, right? And so, yeah, that is the abomination of desolation. This because keep in mind, like, the number one way to insult a Jewish person is to sacrifice a pig, but he's not just sacrificing a pig; he's sacrificing it to another god, but he's doing it in the holy temple, right? And so this is just like the most blasphemous thing you could think of. By smooth words, he will turn to godlessness those who act wickedly toward the covenant. So Antiochus is going to successfully compel many Jews to abandon the Torah and adopt Greek customs. And there's even a gymnasium that's built in the city to where there's some historical sources which joke that the priests would rush through their teachings so that they could rush down to the gymnasium and compete in the games. That's how corrupt things were at the time. And Hellenization was rewarded, to where if you complied with him, you were rewarded and he treated you well. If you tried to stick to Torah, you could be punished. But the people who know their God will display strength. Faithful Jews refused to comply with Antiochus' demands. They continued to practice Torah, they refused pagan sacrifices, and they suffered, some of them even unto death. And we do have stories of that. If you read the books of like 1st and 2nd Maccabees and 3rd and 4th Maccabees and stuff, it tells us those stories. We're going to read little excerpts from it in just a second. And they will take action. There are organized resistance movements that begin to attack garrisons and destroy pagan altars. Right? There are some Jewish people who say enough is enough, and they fight back. And this is going to pave the way for the Maccabees. And those who have insight among the people will give understanding to the many, yet they will fall by the sword and by flame, by captivity and plunder for many days. There are faithful leaders in these movements. The most famous of which are the Hasidim. Even to this day, you have people who are called Hasidic Jews. It comes from the word Hesed, right? So Hasidim are practicers of Hesed. And so the Hasidim and other religious leaders, they're going to be the ones who are offering instruction on how to remain faithful amidst persecution during this time period. And they're just trying to teach people how do we respond. Because not all of them responded like the Maccabees, and not all of them said, we got to fight. Some of them were just saying, maybe we have to suffer. Or there's got to be a way to be faithful and not fight back. Yet, even these people, many of them would end up dying, right? Because Torah observance itself, and any sort of resistance, became a punishable offense, even unto death. And so here's some excerpts. I'm going to have Sean read those because my voice is tired.
After subduing Egypt, Antiochus turned back in the 143rd year and went against Israel and came to Jerusalem with a strong force. He arrogantly entered the sanctuary and took the golden altar, the lampstand for the light, and all its utensils. He took also the table for the bread of the presence, the cups for drink offerings, the bowls, the golden censers, the curtain, the crowns, and the gold decoration on the front of the temple. He stripped it all off. He took the silver and the gold and the costly vessels. He took also the hidden treasures that he found. Taking them all, he went into his own land.
Yeah. And so this is literally 1 Maccabees chapter 1. All the only excerpts we're reading just from chapter 1, to where you can read the rest of the book if you want all of it, but this is just letting you know how central this was. Daniel's just giving us a summary, but this guy did a lot, right? He comes in and think about how beautiful the temple's supposed to be, right? He's stripping all the gold off the walls. He's doing all the same stuff that Nebuchadnezzar did. And you can understand why people like the Maccabees would want to fight back, right? Because they don't want to go into another exile. They've been they want to stay in the land, and so they're going to fight back. Right, here's another excerpt.
Then the king wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people, and that all should give up their particular customs. All the nations accepted the command of the king. Many even from Israel gladly adopted his religion. They sacrificed to idols and profaned the Sabbath. And the king sent letters by messengers to Jerusalem and the towns of Judah. He directed them to follow customs strange to the land, to forbid burnt offerings and sacrifices and drink offerings in the sanctuary, to profane Sabbaths and festivals, to defile the sanctuary and the holy ones, to build altars and sacred precincts and shrines for idols, to sacrifice pigs and other unclean animals, and to leave their sons uncircumcised. They were to make themselves abominable by everything unclean and profane, so that they would forget the law and change all the ordinances. He added, and whoever does not obey the command of the king shall die.
Yeah, so I mainly wanted to include this part because it just lets you know some of the instructions he put in place, right? To where after the Jews return from exile, by and large, they don't really struggle with idolatry anymore until Antiochus, right? Antiochus is the one who shows up, and it's because he's giving them a positive reason to do it. It's like practice idolatry or die, right? And so it's a totally different thing than we saw in the Old Testament, because whenever you look at like what Isaiah and Jeremiah and them are confronting, those are people who are just willfully choosing to do it out of just their desire to be like the culture. Whereas these are people who are saying like, they're having to answer like, okay, do I want to live? And there are some people who they suffer unto death and they are martyrs for their faith. But a lot of them, they just sacrifice to idols. They profane the Sabbath. They're like, it's not worth it. Which I would argue that it is worth it because God gave them those instructions. But yeah, so he does all these things. He says that you can no longer circumcise your child. Like what's crazy is that it means that he had to go through the effort of knowing what mattered to them in order to prohibit it. You know what I mean? Like that's the crazy thing about Antiochus Epiphanes, to where you can understand why they hate him so much, because it's like this guy studied them so much so that he could outlaw specifically all the things that were so central to who they were. You know, like if you were to ask I don't know, if you were to ask the average American Christian, like, how could you make a Jew's life miserable? They would not even think to list most of these things out, right?
Yeah. Like I wouldn't even know how to like persecute like Hindus or something if I like.
Exactly, right? Yeah. Like if you wanted to persecute somebody, I'd be like, oh crap, I don't even know how to do that. Whereas he studied it and he's like, okay, circumcision matters to them, no circumcision, and there's no rhyme or reason. Like it's not like he has like a positive reason for it. It's literally just like he's probably just saying, I believe that y'all's religion is disgusting. I'm outlawing it. Towards like circumcision, no. Sabbath, no. Sacrifices, no. None of that. He's like, I'll offer a sacrifice to another god, and I'm gonna find the animal that you find the most unclean, and I'm gonna do it in your temple. Towards it's like, ooh, this is bad. Here's one more excerpt. I think this is the last one. Yeah.
Okay. Now on the 15th day of Kislev, in the 145th year, they erected a desolate sacrilege on the altar of burnt offering. They also built altars in the surrounding towns of Judah and offered incense at the doors of the houses and in the streets. The books of the law that they found, they tore to pieces and burned with fire. Anyone found possessing the book of the covenant, or anyone who adhered to the law, was condemned to death by decree of the king. They kept using violence against Israel, against those who were found month after month in the towns. On the 25th day of the month, they offered sacrifice on the altar that was on the top of the altar of burnt offering. According to the decree, they put to death the women who had their children circumcised, and their families, and those who circumcised them, and they hung the infants from their mothers' necks.
Yeah. So, not great. Not great. That just details the so-called abomination of desolation and just what's going on there. And again, just a death penalty for following Torah. And you do have to respect the I respect the martyrs a lot more than I respect the Maccabees, because I know the Maccabees are like the heroes of the Jewish people, and that's why they celebrate Hanukkah and stuff. But to me, whenever I read the Bible, it seems like God favors the martyrs, right? Like rather than the people who fight back, He wants people to, like people who are willing to stand up and say, no, God commanded us to do this, and we're not bowing down. But they're not going to stoop so low as to fight back and justify murder. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you have the exile of in Babylon. God explicitly punishing them for rebelling.
Yeah, for fighting back and stuff. Yeah, Jeremiah says surrender. So I don't know. I just find that interesting. It's but this is a very dark time in Judea's history and stuff, and I don't want to downplay it and make it a very simple decision, because it never is, right? I mean, that's even something for us. If things ever get to the point where there is persecution, it's never going to be just an easy choice of dude, just go die for your faith. I mean, there are times where it is good to fight.
Yeah.
But There's also times where it's good to just die, and there's also times where it's good to run, and there's times where it's not good to run. Like it's none of it's easy. I just I don't know. This is a time period I want to study more, but yeah. All right, just read till the red line.
Okay. Now, when they fall, they will be granted a little help, and many will join with them in intrigue. And some of those who have insight will fall, in order to refine, purge, and make them white, until the time of the end, because it is still to come at the appointed time.
Right. The last part that we read was talking about people who were dying for their faith and being martyred, right? And so it says, when they fall, they will be granted a little help, right? And so many of these people were falling because some of them were being martyred and some of them were rising up in resistance groups. And it says they'll be granted a little help, and most people would interpret this little help as being a reference to the Maccabees themselves. And so as persecution is rising, there's going to be this one incident where this priest, Mattathias, he's going to say enough is enough. Basically, the Seleucids are going to be coming through his city. I forget the exact thing. I think they're wanting them to offer a pagan sacrifice, and Mattathias refuses. Another priest steps forward, and he's willing to do it, and Mattathias says no, and he kills both the Seleucid soldier and the priest in like one swoop. And that kicks everything off to where him and his sons, they flee into the wilderness, and a bunch of people flee to them, and they begin throwing together like this army of like guerrilla warfare fighters. After Mattathias dies, his oldest son, Judah, ends up taking the reins, and Judah's nickname is the Hammer. And the name Hammer is Maccabee. And so whenever you talk about the Maccabees, you're really like it's Judah's nickname. So it's Judah Maccabee, Judah the Hammer, and the whole family is collectively known as the Maccabees. And so they're the ones who ultimately lead this fight against the Seleucids, and they are going to eventually win. And so many will join with him in the intrigue. The movement's going to gain traction, and an increasing number of Jews will join the resistance. And some of those who have insight will fall in order to refine, purge, and make them white until the time of the end, because it is still to come at the appointed time. So there are faithful leaders who will be killed, captured, and broken, yet this will ultimately strengthen the movement and its resolve to succeed, and persecution will continue until the Seleucids are ultimately defeated and the temple rededicated in 164. And so by the time the Maccabees actually win, Antiochus is actually going to be dead already. So Antiochus, he dies the same year that the Maccabees are victorious, but he dies a little bit earlier. So the Maccabees end up winning. They rededicate the temple. As they ride into the city, people calm down. They cut down palm branches and wave them before them, and they welcome them into the city for destroying their pagan oppressors. And then they have this whole thing where they, since they had missed the recent Feast of Tabernacles, right? Because Feast of Tabernacles is in October, and it's an 8-day festival. Since they had just missed that, they decide to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles now that the temple's been rededicated, and so they institute an 8-day long holiday. And then they end up going a little bit longer, so it's 9 days, and that ends up becoming the Feast of Hanukkah, which Hanukkah just means rededication, or it just means dedication. I put a red line here, and that's because from this point onwards, the text becomes a lot harder to understand. Because there's really two options you have here, or three options, I guess, but two of them are kind of the same. From verse 36 to the end of the chapter, this could still be talking about Antiochus IV, but if it is, it's almost just going back to the beginning of his story and just giving us like a highlight recap, which seems strange, right? Like, and so if you're gonna interpret it as like historically in the past, that seems like the clearest approach. But to me, there's nothing in the text which would indicate that. The other two options are the idea that this is somebody after Antiochus. But if it's a king that has existed, we do not know who it is. Because there's really not a king after Antiochus who fits the description of verses 36 and onwards. Which leads to the third interpretation, which many adopt, which is that verse 36 and onwards is talking about a yet future king who is going to be like Antiochus, but to an even more extreme degree. And I think that makes sense because verse 35 specifically specifies, it says like until the time of the end, because it's still to come at the appointed time. And so we've seen this phrase until the time of the end a few times throughout the story. But the way that verse 35 ends, it actually does allow for an unspecified amount of time to pass in between verse 35 and 36, right? Because technically, if you were to go look at the Hebrew of it, verse 36, it doesn't say then the king, it says and the king, right? And so it could say and the king in the sense of, okay, well this is Antiochus, and then it's just like summarizing his reign. But even then, if it is summarizing his reign, there are some places where it works, and there's some places where we literally have no idea what this would be talking about. But it also could be that there's a huge gap, kind of like there was earlier with with Alexander the Great, right? Where and there might even be evidence for that, because with Alexander the Great, remember, it didn't say and this king; it just said and a king will be great. And so the fact that it doesn't say and he will do as he pleases would suggest to me maybe this is somebody different than Antiochus, right? It says and the king, but then you have to ask what king, and we don't really know, right? And so what I did here, we're not going to spend as much time on it. Like, honestly, I'm just going to have Sean read through it, and we'll just like summarize it very briefly. But the two columns I have there, the middle column is trying to interpret this through the line, like the name, like assuming this is Antiochus, it's trying to fit it. And then on the right, it's assuming this is some sort of like Antichrist figure. To where the far right is just basically a general summary of what Daniel is saying, so that we can figure out what to look for, I guess.
Yeah.
But it really is hard to interpret. And so we'll just kind of go through it relatively quickly.
Yeah. Are you saying like just you're gonna keep going through the whole thing?
No. You can read through it. We'll do it how we've been doing it. I'm just gonna spend less time on it.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
Okay. Then the king will do as he pleases, and he will exalt and magnify himself above every god, and will speak astonishing things against the God of gods, and he will succeed until the indignation is complete, for that which is decreed will be done.
Yeah, and so if this is Antiochus, in general, this is just talking about a guy who exalts himself above God. He is going to do some sort of thing which is called the indignation, which is generally a term describing God's judgment on somebody, and he does it for an appointed time. And this works for Antiochus because we do have previous prophecies that talk about Antiochus, like persecuting the Jews for 2,300 days, like mornings and days, so like 3.5 years and stuff. And so that does work. And sure enough, Antiochus's like adopted title is Epiphanes or Epiphanes, which means God manifest. And he did really elevate himself above other local deities and stuff, and so that does work. However, in general, Daniel's describing some king who will exalt himself above gods, but he's only going to do it for an appointed time, right? And so it could be Antiochus, it could be a future king. It's up to you to decide.
He will show no regard for the gods of his fathers, or for the desire of women, nor will he show regard for any other god, for he will magnify himself above them all. But instead he will honor a god of fortresses, a god whom his fathers did not know. He will honor him with gold, silver, costly stones, and desirable things.
Yeah, this is where it starts getting really weird, because it's hard to, like, if this is Antiochus, it's hard to figure out what it's referring to. And that's where, like, some people might push back, and they'll say, oh, well, see, this is evidence that the Bible doesn't know what it's talking about. But the thing is, everything else in the chapter has been so accurate. To where it's like,
Yeah.
you can't really, like...
Well, yeah, if you're going to follow that logic, then their own logic kind of contradicts their own argument, because if you're going to argue, like, let's say, for example, that, like, the whole, like, this is written later, and it's, like, very planned.
Yeah.
Well, you would think this would be a very big oversight.
Yeah.
If they spent all this time, like, carefully making sure this prophecy is right,
Yeah.
and then somehow they just, like, that wouldn't even make sense.
They just screwed up at the very end. Yeah, it really doesn't make any sense, right? So, it's something where it is very weird, because if they wrote this afterwards, they did a great job until the end, which is just a big oversight. But if they did it ahead of time, you can't really argue, oh, well, God can predict for 350 years, but he can't predict 370. It's like, maybe there's just something weird going on here. You know what I mean? So, like,
you gotta take all of it.
Yeah, and so everything else has been so like it's not like everything else was so general that anybody could have predicted it. It's so specific to where it's like, oh no, that's clearly somebody who knows the future, and so this should not discourage you. It just should intrigue you, really. But it really is hard to identify this with clear stuff with Antiochus because it talks about him showing no regards for the gods of his fathers, but like it's not that Antiochus was like anti like Greek stuff. Instead, it's just that he repurposed it for political ends. But then you could say, like, if this, like, whenever it says the God of his fathers, maybe it's talking about, like, the God of the fathers, right? Like, the God of, like, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That makes more sense, right? But, I don't know, it's just kind of weird. It talks about him exalting himself above other gods. I talked about already that Antiochus was known for being kind of just very arrogant, but also, like, kind of eccentric. And there was actually a joke amongst the people to where, behind his back, his name was Epiphanes, right? So, God manifests. But they called him Epimanes, which just means insane one. So that was like, that's how they mocked him. But then, like, even when it talks about, like, instead he will honor a god of the fortresses, we don't even know what that means. It's like, what is that? Like, it could be that it's saying that, like, military power is his god in his eyes. It's like he doesn't honor, like, the Greek gods. Instead, he honors, like, the god of fortresses, like, just like strongholds. I don't know.
Start a new religion.
Yeah. Well, no, like it almost sounds like that. I don't know. But then like, or it could be that like maybe like he views Zeus as like the protector of the strongholds, or maybe it's like just like his struggle. I don't know. It's very hard to interpret what exactly is going on if this is Antiochus, right?
Yeah.
That's the main thing I'm trying to get across there. Yeah, and so.
And he will take action against the strongest of fortresses with the help of a foreign god. He will give great honor to those who recognize him, and will cause them to rule over the many, and will apportion land for a price. And at the time of the end, the king of the south will collide with him, and the king of the north will storm against him with chariots, with horsemen, and with many ships. And he will enter lands, overflow them, and pass through.
Yeah, and so again, if this is Antiochus, it's just recapping what we already talked about, right? He launches campaigns towards the south. He's passing through them. But the thing is, we didn't really hear about Antiochus launching, like, naval campaigns. Whereas it says, like, he's going, like, with horsemen and ships. That's kind of weird. I don't know. It's just, like there's just stuff here where it's, like, I don't know what this referred to. Like, if it is Antiochus, it's not talking about stuff later in his reign, because we kind of already got to the end of his reign, right? He died in 164 BC, while the Judean persecutions were still going on. And so, I don't know.
Yeah. So it says that the king of the south will collide with him and the king of the north will storm against him. So is that saying this is a separate guy from the king of the north and south?
I was trying to figure that out. I don't know.
Yeah.
Because, like, those names dropped out for quite a while.
Yeah.
And this guy has simply been identified as the king, to where I was even struggling that, like, if you're interpreting this as the Antichrist, it's hard to determine that it's, like, is this two kings coming towards the Antichrist, or is the Antichrist one of them, right? Like, because the last person we've been following for several verses, for like 20 verses, is the king of the north. And then it says the king of the south will come against him, and the king of the north will stop and storm against him. And so it could be that the king of the north is the king we've been talking about. I don't know. That's what I'm saying. This part just gets weird and hard to interpret.
Yeah.
Where I don't know.
Because for a minute I was like thinking, up until like where the gray starts, I was like, I could even see this like a kind of like almost like commentary on like the general thing of like how all these kings are gonna act. Though it was like too specific for it was too specific for it to be like generally about all the kings, like how Samuel says like kings will take.
Yeah.
It's like, so the king will do this and he will do this, but then we got to this point and it's like it just goes right back to the king of north and south, and so that seems too specific for it to just be like yeah.
So I don't know. It's just like that verse in particular is one that stumped me because I'm like, and I was even looking it up, and I think people just all assume, like, what's frustrating is when you look online is that there's nobody who's really like wrestling through the text. They just pick how they interpret it, and then they force it to apply. Like, to where there's people who are like, oh, this is Antiochus the Fourth, and then they force every single part to apply to him. And there's people who are like, no, this is the Antichrist, and they force it to apply. Mm-hmm. Whereas I'm just like, I want to see people who are wrestling through like the text.
Yeah.
It's like just follow the text where it leads. Don't just like pick a camp and tell me what you think. I want to like why do you think that? And I have a tough time finding those sources, which really frustrates me. Like I'm sure the sources are out there, but there's just so many books, and I think
Where to
that
find.
and the books that are popular are the ones that just pick sides
Mhm.
because that's what people want. They want like easy answers, whereas I'm wanting to like wrestle through like the deeper things. But
Yeah.
it's probably just going to be other tiny YouTube channels that are, you know what I mean? Like that's the unfortunate reality of like
Yeah.
the stuff that gets popular nowadays is the stuff that gives you like systematized stuff that answers all the questions you could ever want.
Yeah. And you weren't able to find like anything maybe like Jewish sources or anything?
I didn't honestly have as much time
Oh,
to look
yeah,
into it,
that's
but
true.
yeah, like I would look into some of this, but as best I could tell, I think a lot of the Jewish sources just interpret it as being Antiochus. But that's like mainly just like if you're on like Safaria and just like looking at like the first commentaries, and it's always like Rashi, and so
Oh,
it's
yeah.
like I never know what to do with Rashi because like he's like sometimes good and sometimes just like sometimes he has some great insights and then sometimes just like where did you pull that out of your butt? Like it's weird. Anyways, we're almost at the end.
And he will also enter the beautiful land, and many countries will fall. But these will be rescued out of his hand, Edom, Moab, and the foremost of the sons of Ammon. Then he will send forth his hand against other countries, and the land of Egypt will not escape. But he will rule over the hidden treasures of gold and silver, and over all the desirable things of Egypt. And Libyans and Ethiopians will follow at his heels.
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, we don't really hear about Edom and Moab and Ammon during Antiochus, and so I guess it's safe to say that like they probably didn't get captured. Like that's just
Yeah,
that's the best we can say. Like it's like the Transjordan area just wasn't really like being competed over, I guess, that much because I guess people just didn't really care for it. I don't know. And then like when it comes to like Libyans and Ethiopians thing, I have no idea what that could be a reference to in regards to Antiochus because that's even further south than Egypt, and Antiochus never really got past Alexandria. So I have no idea. Like that's why things like this, I'm like, I don't know. It's. I mean, I see commentaries that force it to apply, where they're like, oh well, maybe there's just like this happened and we just don't know about it, which is possible, but it seems like the whole point of Daniel is that this is supposed to be stuff that we should be able to know. You know what I mean? Like when it happens, and I guess it is possible that maybe like the people living during that time period knew about it. The only issue with that is that the average everyday person in ancient times was less familiar with what was going on in contemporary history than we are. Because, you know, like nowadays we have like the internet and stuff to keep us updated, whereas
Yeah.
to me, whatever an ancient person could have known about their contemporary like political climate usually was probably popular enough that it would have like been preserved in like a historical resource. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and so it is possible that maybe there are like these things did happen and we just don't know about them, and so we have a tough time identifying it. But to me, it seems easier to explain that maybe this is just talking about something in the future. I don't know. To where it's almost like we've talked about all these other kings that like to see a general rule, and then finally there's like this final king who's being described who is going to be even worse than Antiochus Epiphanes. But this is the end of the chapter.
But reports from the east and from the north will dismay him, and he will go forth with great wrath to destroy and devote many to destruction. And he will pitch the tents of his royal pavilion between the seas and the beautiful holy mountain. Yet he will come to his end, and no one will help him.
Yeah, so I guess hypothetically, maybe at some point, Antiochus pitched his tent somewhere between Jerusalem and the Mediterranean, but we don't have any record of that. I mean, we know that he passed through the land, and so it isn't unreasonable to think that at some point he did stay in that region. But to me, the language would seem to apply more to things that we later see described in regards to the Antichrist. Like whenever you get to like Thessalonians and stuff, it makes more sense.
Yeah.
And I could see why the apostles would arrive at that conclusion, right? Because they're looking, they're like, this doesn't seem to be talking about Antiochus. But even then, if it was Antiochus, because even when you go earlier into the stuff that is very clearly Antiochus Epiphanes, there is stuff about that where Jesus and the apostles interpret that as referring to later things as well, like the abomination of desolation. That is clearly Antiochus Epiphanes. But Jesus says it's going to happen again in the future. And so it's just, prophecy is just weird sometimes. And so the way Antiochus died is that he died in Persia while his campaigns were failing. But I don't know, I guess that could be a fulfillment of the last thing. But it makes more sense if this is like an Antichrist figure and he's dying in the land of Israel during some like battle. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because the last time we left him is pitching his tents in the beautiful land, and it says he will come to his end, which seems to imply it's happening there. But
Yeah, and it's like between the sea, between the coast and Jerusalem. So like that could be like where he's like fighting like in like Valley Megiddo or something.
yeah, and so I don't know. So the cool part about this is that this is the most detailed prophecy in the Bible, and as is the case with Daniel, there are some parts of it where you're like, wow, I know exactly what's going on, and then there's parts where you're just like, beats me. And so there is that chapter. Thanks for dealing with me, going through all of that. I would encourage you to go look up the history of it yourself, because
Yeah.
honestly, I'm kind of glad to be done with it, because I've been looking into this stuff for way too long, and like my brain is like fried from trying to remember it.
Yeah.
I wish I could remember more details, but it doesn't help that I've been.
I was tuning out just part of the
Yeah.
time on just in this lesson.
Yeah, no, but like it's also it doesn't help that I've been like literally dead sick and like bedridden for the last week, to where like my brain's still foggy. I'm like,
Yeah.
but
That was so much thinking.
yeah,
When he begun studying.
yeah. And so we'll just wrap up. I don't think we did application stuff last week.
Yeah.
The good news is that we've only got one more week left in Daniel,
Yeah.
and it's only 13 verses, and so
Ooh.
hopefully we shouldn't be tuning out during that. It'll be good. But can I want y'all to close this out in prayer?